The Stars Rain Down. Book 1, Who Owns You? By Glenn Thomas. For Tom, a brilliant mind taken too early, the only one who got me. Preface. I've often asked Catherine, why don't you write all this stuff down? She'd tell me stories, things she saw, places, planets she'd been to, weird aliens, fights she got herself into, fights she won and fights she lost, chasing Rick. She's been telling me these stories since I was a little girl while putting me to bed, around the dinner table, out riding our spiders, or, more recently, skinny dipping in Lake Plummer. My mother died when I was 12. Catherine came to take care of me, as Dad had his hands full with the ranch, the business, and the family tragedy on top of all that. She'd tell me stories to help me cope with the loss, help me forget. Then she was gone again. I grew more rebellious as I got into my teens. Nothing new there. I ran away from home many times. But my best escape from home, and longest, was when I was 16. Got into trouble. Nearly lost my life to a pretty mean trapdoor. Somehow, God willing, I survived my excursions, returned home, and went to bed. And guess who was waiting for me the next morning? Catherine gave me a stern talking to, lectured me up and down. She did a much better job of that than Dad, who'd probably get me to run off again. That was the last time I'd run away, and the last time I'd be away from Catherine. She moved in and this time stayed. One time, I called her Mom. She wasn't having that. She insisted I call her by name, and as usual, Catherine had her way. She'd tell me stories again to get my mind off myself and my anxieties, perceived or otherwise. And the great thing was, she'd never tell the same story twice, unless I asked her. I never got a rerun, but it's not any wonder why, as Catherine will be turning 172 in a couple of months. She doesn't look a day over 25, so she's loaded with stories. The thought crossed my mind that maybe she was making all this up, and when confronted about it, she assured me that every word was true. It really happened. She wasn't running a deception program. She wouldn't do that to me. A great idea hit me. I told her, "You should write a book, an autobiography." She gave me that deep, throaty laugh of hers. Who'd read it? I knew an excuse when I heard one. I was the queen of excuses. She just didn't want to write it. Maybe it was the thought that her long, amazing story would one day vanish into the ether, in the unlikely event that she'd pass on and her experiences disappear with her. I got bold and reckless. I blurted out, "Then I'll do it. I'll write it." Nothing new there, bold and reckless. I blame Catherine for those traits. They've gotten me in and out of trouble over the years, depending on the circumstances. You tell me everything and I'll write it down. She looked at me with those big brown eyes. Everything? How much time you got? Yeah, I know it's going to be a long one. Even then, before putting down one word, I had a pretty good hunch that I wouldn't get it all in one book. Nobody's going to read a 1,000-page leviathan of a biography. We're going to have to break this down into separate books, a series. So some time went by. I put it off. Catherine didn't ask me about it, and maybe her disinterest in the project was what got me annoyed with her. She didn't seem to care about her life immortalized in books, but then again, that might explain her reluctance. And then, on top of that, if that wasn't bad enough, people were talking about her. Rumors and misconceptions were circulating about Catherine, bordering on outrageous fables and myths. Catherine wasn't really an android, but a flesh-and-blood human masquerading as an AI just for attention. Catherine was some sort of demigod who came to our world either to enlighten and empower us or to chastise and humble us, depending on who was talking. Some speculated that Catherine was plotting a takeover of the galaxy and imposing a ruling android autocracy for all time, enslaving humans, humanoids, and just about anything else living and breathing. It was getting ridiculous. So, one Sunday morning at the ranch, I got my computer out, sat down across from Catherine, who was sipping a cup of coffee, and said, Okay, now we're doing this. Tell me everything. She didn't answer right away. She took a long sip and looked at me as she swallowed, judging my commitment if I had the legs for a ride of this distance. You better tell me, girl. If we start this, you better finish it. I will. I don't want to hear you halfway into it. You got bored, and now you gone back to a showgirl again. Well, that stung. I promise you I'll finish it. 'Cause you got a history of running when times get hard. That was a long time ago. Not that long. I want to do this. Please, let me write your book. She was right. I was a runner. And I'm not talking about track and field. But since the idea first came to me, I was obsessed. I wanted her story, all of it. Catherine took another sip, longer than the first, big eyes on me. Okay, writer, where do you want to start? Geez, like popping the lid off a jar of pickles. Your birthday. What was your first memory? My father, Ian Mercer. He was standing in front of me in the AI lab at Equinox. My first memory was the sound of his voice when he told me to wake up, and the music. My eyes were closed. As you might expect from an android, Catherine has a photographic memory in both sight and sound. She can tell you in the most precise detail every moment of her life, every word spoken, the name of every person involved, down to the most minor characters. She can tell you the time of day to the second when she felt a raindrop fall on her head. She could tell you the exact temperature of that raindrop if you cared to know. One thing I had no worries about was the accuracy of Catherine's memory. That's the android part of her, the machine part. I recorded everything as Catherine spoke, and she can let those words out at a pretty good clip. After a short time, I could tell that the more she spoke, the more excited she became. She was reliving those early days, the people, the situations in which she found herself, the feelings, the highs and lows. She got swept up in the emotions whenever she talked about the chase. When she first met Rick McCabe right here on Air Renee, her memory was so keen that it was as if the events she was describing had just happened yesterday. Sometimes she had to stop to dry her eyes. She wouldn't speak and stared out the window. Other times, she would excuse herself to be alone for an hour or two before returning to apologize and resume the story. My God, the wringer that woman went through again and again. At one point, she stopped me with a question. How far were you thinking of taking this book? How's it going to end? How about when you turned human? That's a good place. A question popped into my mind regarding that time of her life, and I couldn't resist the temptation to ask. I jumped to the end of the story, promising myself I wouldn't spend too much time on this tangent. How did you know you were human? How did it feel? Catherine looked me straight in the eye. Pain. I thought that through, recalling another story she had told me earlier, a story in which pain was inflicted on her. I asked her to explain. That was a different pain, she said, her eyes narrowing, the acrimony of the memory digging in. That was physical. Those bastards turned down my pain threshold. I'm talking about a different kind of pain. I got it. I felt pain. She thumped her chest with her fist. Before that moment, I didn't know what pain was. Not this. Not this. She stopped. Her voice wavered as the pain, that kind of pain, crept back inside her, stabbing at her heart. Now I did. That's how I knew I had a soul and a spirit. My spirit was grieved. That's what made me human. And that's Catherine's journey, the emotional spine of this book, or books. How did an android, built by human hands, and artificial intelligence, go from machine to human? Just what is it that makes us human in the first place? If you're paying attention, she answered that question already. We have a soul. A body, spirit, and soul. We're born with them. Don't argue with me. Androids are not. They're AI artificial. Their emotions are simulated, and many times they can be very convincing. So the real question is, how did Catherine get a soul? A soul wasn't one of the components installed in her at Equinox Cybernetics in 2207 on Earth. What Catherine tells you only raises more questions as well as eyebrows. But we'll cross that delicate bridge when we come to it. If you're ever lucky enough to spend a little time with her, I challenge you to come away not convinced that Catherine has a certain quality, a spice that makes her stand out. Listen to her music, the flame of her spirit in her voice. Listen to her sing The First Time Ever I Saw Your Face, if she'll let you. She retired the song from public performance, told me she could no longer get through it without breaking down. The Beatles' In My Life is another hard one for her. That should tell you all you need to know if you still have doubts about her soul. There's some indefinable quality about her that you can't quite put your finger on, even among humans. She's got something. Clearly, something you don't see in other androids. Okay, so how to present this work? What format should it take? To whom am I writing? My thoughts returned to Catherine. Her life was, and is, an adventure. One adventure after another. One could not adequately record her life in the form of a boring lecture. Catherine is an adventure. And that's how I decided to write it. For the adventurer in all of us. Catherine has been studied, analyzed, scanned, poked and prodded, taken apart and reassembled in repeated efforts to understand her and how she works. But the best way to know Catherine is to walk alongside her on her adventures, see what she does, hear her words, reflect on her choices. Wherever possible, the dialogue is word for word spoken by the people involved, especially when Catherine was present. Other times, for those scenes where she was absent, Catherine went on by what was told to her by those persons taking part, Rick and QR in particular. With regards to the scenes where neither she nor anyone else had direct access to the information, say like the meanwhile back in the bad guy's hideout kind of scenes, Catherine and I pieced together what info we could gather from the official records to form the best reconstructions of what may have happened. Then I leaned a little on my creative license to fill out the rest. Well, maybe a lot of leaning, but it makes for good entertainment, in my opinion. At Catherine's insistence, I did not write her stories in the traditional memoir-style first-person narrative. In her opinion, she felt the book would come across as too self-indulgent. She wanted that disconnect. I completely disagreed with her, and we argued for some time. But as these are her stories, and out of my undying respect for her, in the end, I relented. Besides that, there were so many characters coming and going, and the points of view jumped so often that perhaps it was better, for simplicity's sake, to keep to one voice, third person. So there, Catherine, you got your way again. A note on technology. I decided early on to avoid lapsing into detailed explanations on how complicated current technology works, as that would quickly bore the reader. And this is not a technical manual either. We all may be aware that we travel faster than light. Well, we sidestep the laws, actually, by warping space-time in front of and behind a ship with Alcubierre engines, and by manipulating gravitational fields. I'm not going to go into how all that works. My apologies to those of you who love the technobabble and the mechanics of it all, but this story's big enough as it is. Also, for the sake of clarity, all measurements of distance, weight, and even time, including dates and persons' ages, have been converted to provenance standard. And lastly, my apologies to those who might accuse me of favoritism, of putting Catherine on a pedestal, that she can do no wrong, she's too perfect, etc., etc. Yeah, I'm well aware of that. I'm writing with a personal bias that I fully admit. Catherine is an android, so it is rather challenging to highlight their imperfections, especially one that's got a soul. But she's got them, the faults, nonetheless, just like the rest of us humans. I'll try to balance it out the best I can without the personal bias influencing my choices too much. But I can't guarantee anything. I'm only human. Catherine Mercer is, after all, my great-great-great-grandmother. So, allow me this one small indulgence to present her adventures how I see fit. I promise you, Hers is no ordinary story. Haley Morgan, Winter 2379, Air Rene,